Welcome, viewers and listeners. I have an original story for you. But first, I have a question. You may have heard of the saying, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound? While this may seem like a silly philosophical question, and you might be thinking, of course it does, let me pose a question of my own. If a terrible atrocity happens but nobody in the future remembers or can produce evidence of it, did the terrible thing actually happen? Is it all just a matter of perception, or is there something more? Think about that, and at the end of the video, I'll share what many of the greatest minds had to say about this. Now, let's begin the story. I like to call it Emma, 23. Emma, 23, stood staring in childlike curiosity as her acquaintance Bob, 27, lay in a deep slumber. His polished cinnamon leather saints, size number 9, pointed up towards the wispy clouds. Half of his body sprawled out across the warm honey and mustard-colored pavers, the same paver path Emma walked on her short travels to work every day. His brown suede jacket lay uncharacteristically open, revealing the white underside of his coat pockets. How strange, she thought. In all the years she had known Bob, she was sure he would never leave his dwelling pod without his morning coat buttoned and fashioned properly. In fact, she knew he was quite particular when it came to that. A light tap clicked at the toe of her black Mary Jane's. Looking down, a realization dawned on her. The thread had been severed. His button must have worn away at its binding strings and simply fallen off. It all began to make much more sense. The stylish and sharp-dressed credit delivery man's recent attire mishap could all be explained so easily now. That's it. Bob 27's coat was so disheveled for one simple reason. He had simply lost its button. Picking up the standard brown 4-hole button, Emma moved in closer. Relieved, she let out a light, airy hum only she could hear. It pleased her quite a bit, knowing she could realign things to normal by returning Bob's missing fastener. The clothing boutique she worked at was only a short 5-minute walk from here. All her needle, thread, and seamstress tools would be there. She could fix Bob up in no time at all, Emma thought, a small smile forming on her soft, rose-colored cheeked face. When things got out of place in her life, which they rarely, if ever, did, she was always quick to correct them. It's just the way her mind was woven. But the oddest thing happened when she moved nearer to Bob's position. Now with a better sightline, a patch of tiny hairs on the back of her neck tingled undesirably, which was then followed by a sudden wide dilation in her pupils. She could feel them just as intensely as she could feel her rounding back and shoulders wound tight with tension, eerily unable to move. It was then that she had come to realize Bob 27 wasn't alone. Hunched and back-turned, a man in an even more unsettling coat filled with filth and holes had a hand inside Bob 27's opposite coat pocket. Emma's eyes couldn't register what she was seeing. Something between the connection, pairing her eyes, head, and comprehension, was failing. With a slight tilt to her chin, she watched as the man rustled in Bob's pocket. Metal clanking and rattling sounded as he replaced what was in that pocket with his own. A slithering creature moved from underneath the man's rotting coat, appearing as a somewhat withered, leafy brown point protruding out slowly. Revealing itself further, the strange, scaled creature wavered like a large worm, continuing to slide further and further from underneath the man's coat. With an extended twitch, it flicked Bob's still slumbering face with a spitting whack. She found her eyes would not look away. Actually, they could not. Immense curiosity and confusion hijacked her attention. The crouched figure buried his head closer to Bob's abdomen, right as a snapping crunch sound passed into her ears. Red dye or paint began to form a small puddle at their side. "Please no," she wanted to say. If the unknown man and Bob weren't careful, the red dye would stain their clothes more than they already had. Now even what she had thought was a separate creature moved again, its pointed tip and hard scales twitching and slithering in the increasingly growing pool of red dye. Emma then knew this was officially the most unsettlingly abnormal day she could ever remember. Leon 7 took a place next to her. Emma was so distracted she hadn't even heard his loud shoes clicking on the pavers as they normally did. "Well day, isn't it? Good, Emma 23. Shaking her mind from the tangle of confusion and questions, Emma found herself responding in her normal predetermined greeting pattern. "Evermore well it is, good Leon 7. Is that Bob 27? Surely he is not sleeping at this hour and place. If so, he is going to miss." His voice cut off and wavered on the last few words as he most assuredly noticed the ragged man with some appendage-like creature atop Bob. A brief pause as the two citizens took in the unordinary scene. Then, after a moment, responding as if she knew the rest of his sentence, which she did due to the common greeting patterns, Emma replied, trying to be cordial. "That's a most excellent point, Leon 7. I think it has something to do with this other man. Do you by chance know who he is?" Studying both Leon and the slightly larger than average scaled man, Emma noticed Leon's eyes were first drawn to the appendage sticking out from beneath his torn and mangled coat. The appendage, possibly a tail, she was starting to seriously consider, had shimmering light brown scales like those fictional reptiles, but only a few shades darker than her own skin. As she followed the dark and muddy coat to the man's neck, she realized the scales also contorted around the back and side of his head, but in a finer pattern. "I regret to say, good Emma 23, I have never seen such a man. Rather a strange-looking one, wouldn't you say?" It was then Bob 27's foot jumped and contorted with a convulsion, then fell still again as the slightly larger man pushed into an area around his neck. More strange red dye or liquid spilled on the path and freshly mowed green grass nearby. That is when the uneasy wet chewing sound started. Thop, twop, twop. "Yes, good Leon 7. Now that you mention it, I believe you are right. Perhaps they need assistance." One of Emma's feet reluctantly released from the ground. Slowly, she began her approach. She could feel Bob's small button grasped tightly, digging into her white, fingernail-tipped hand. Leon 7 watched her with apprehension, probably wondering if he should join. Quickly, he contemplated it. Dressed in the same outfit he wore each day, a pale yellowish suit of perfect fit and quality, he decided to follow. Stepping forward, Emma could hear his shiny black dress shoes, matching his shiny black suitcase, clicking on the straight brick path behind her. You see, everyday citizens come and go along this path without interruption or distress. But that's how everything everywhere always is. Wasn't it? Emma found herself with more questions than ever as she walked. Normally, she would have already made her way to the other side of Sapling Tree Park, a rather small but perfectly preserved piece of nature. She would be in her boutique, working on alterations and fixes, humming her gentle tune. A large sensation of tension and heat began to form within her, a pit of small but noticeable irritation forming in her chest and throat. Now to her left, and about 15 feet from the ever-growing pool of red and the confusing half-man, half-fictional reptile, Leon 7 opened his mouth. He started to call out and offer his assistance when she noticed it. 3 androids were approaching quickly, all moving with incredible speed. The first, a common wellness android, fashioned a bright white and padded body around its electronic chassis, its humanoid head crowned by an electronic visor blinking its blue lines. The accompanying androids, one another wellness android, but the other different altogether, larger, more shiny, and apparently of a sturdier variety of android in which she had never seen before. Closer now, they continued their approach with extremely agile cybernetic movements. Electronic swishing sounds rushing, running, and racing, all towards, in a sudden realization. Her? A blur rocked her vision and flustered her hair, black strands flowing so wildly that they impaired most of her vision. Then, just seconds later, she felt herself standing on her own weight again, and it all calmed almost as quickly as it came. She was physically gone from her spot moments ago. The wellness android released her and stepped back. Another tremendous rush as she saw Leon 7 grab 2. That android placed him down near the park's lavatory building and away from her. The android acted with gentle, measured guidance, completely opposite of the forceful power just exhibited. She could see Leon's gelled hair blown out, as if it just went through a wind turbine. Looking back once more to where they were a few moments ago, Emma quickly regretted that decision. The tailed, scaled man, she had decided that is what it was now, arched its back, chest ballooning. The chewing, which she realized it must have been doing, now stopped as a chunk of something landed on its clawed foot below. The long, heavy foot with dark, unkempt claws pounded down on Bob 27's chest. This time, a guttural crunch sounded as the area sprayed even more red. Emma gasped, color draining from her face. She wanted to let out a scream, but did she even know how? In the same motion, the unreal creature's head jerked up, its oblong face bearing large pointed teeth from thinly cracked lips, covered in more red. With no nose but a rounded hump and slits that sat in the center of its unhuman face. The nightmarish scaled figure then let out a faint screech, stifled by something caught in its throat. An electronic voice sounded, "Well day, good Emma 23. Would you mind coming with me? There is no need to look that way anymore," the android added. Emma broke her gaze backward and stared, eyes watering and blinking into the android's blue-lined face. "Emotional distress, fear, and confusion detected," the android said aloud as it analyzed her. "Threat reduction and emotional support mode engaged. Citizen, all will be fine now. The protection androids have everything under control. Now please, come with me." Looking at the wellness android, she noticed G14 inscribed on its chest pad. The blue-lined face, waving slightly more erratically, shifted back to a calming, somber line. "Well," stuttering a bit, "if you say so," Emma responded. "Wait, what about Leon 7 and Bob 27? Citizen Leon will be returned to his pod shortly. Any other questions you must save for the Mind Easer." "Oh yes, a Mind Easer," Emma thought. She had heard about them. After today, she would most certainly need her mind set back into a state of comfort, she thought to herself. With calculated movements, the wellness android escorted her away. As she was being accompanied back to her home pod, Emma thought she heard a screeching sound, followed by faint metallic clangs and thuds, but that too faded as the normal sound of rustling water fountains and chirping birds once again took over. So much red. Red on Bob 27, red on that scaled man, leaking everywhere. It was even on that strange man's lips. What exactly was that, and where did it come from? Could it be that it came from inside? Emma pressed a hand to her stomach, an uneasy feeling setting in, as the other still gripped the button from this morning's incident. Emma looked down at the tray with her daily sustenance cubes, 3 gelatinous cubes packed tight, nutritious, flavorful, and filling. The color of today's cubes, of course, had to be red. A tap, 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 followed by a light ring, alerted Emma from a seat within her pod's sustenance room. Shaking herself from her uneasy trance, she stood, patting down the front of her green dress and finally putting Bob's lost button in a small pocket within the dress. She reached for the handle. Outside stood a woman accompanied by a wellness android, G17 this time. "Hello, good Emma 23. My name is Margaret 11, and I'm the Mind Easer." Emma found herself saying, almost on autopilot, "Most pleasant to meet you, Margaret 11. Welcome, please do come in." She watched as the woman and android entered her pod. "Wow, I love the decor in here. So fashionable," Margaret 11 offered. "Wouldn't you agree, G17? "Yes, Ms. Margaret, very fashionable." But the android's tone had a hard time selling it like its human counterpart. "Would you mind if we take a seat together, good Emma?" "Well, I mean, why, yes, good Margaret. That would be most satisfactory," she said as she picked up the edge of her dress so it wouldn't crease as the two women sat. "Oh my, where are my manners? Could I offer you a drink, good Margaret?" she asked, reaching for her dress, about to stand up again. The woman quickly placed a polite hand on her knee, stopping her from doing so. "Let us have Wellness G17 get the drinks." Immediately, the android went to her sustenance room, where she could hear it searching for the plastic cups in the cupboards. "Now, it is my understanding that you had a rather eventful morning and wish to put your mind at ease. Is that correct?" Emma studied the woman. She appeared of slightly longer life than Emma. Also, her eyes seemed to have an awakened studying experience to them, as if she had seen many things. Either way, she had likable enough features and seemed pleasant, so she answered, "I believe so, good Margaret 11. You see—" Interrupting, Margaret spoke. "Good, Emma. Let's leave the formalities out of it and speak unpatterned. Just refer to me as Margaret only. Now I have something for you." She reached into her black purse and pulled out a small packet. It was at the same time the wellness android came back and put 2 cups of water on the table. "Margaret," started, "you see, my job is to put citizens' minds back at ease, hence the name Mind Easer. And from what I gathered from the wellness reports, you are in need of just that." Reaching out, she gently grasped one of Emma's white-painted nailed hands. "I've found the best way to do this is to do it quickly and gently to minimize distress. This way, our great citizens can go back to their most perfect lives as soon as possible. Would you agree?" She stopped, raising an eyebrow and a strangely studying eye at Emma. Emma suddenly felt as if she had to agree. Otherwise, the woman might change her mood or maybe even get upset. But that was ridiculous, right? She decided to follow her instinct and agreed with the woman. After all, what choice did she have? "Wonderful! Absolutely wonderful, Emma. I knew you would," the joyous woman exclaimed. "So I will show you how it's done." Ripping open the packet, Margaret let 2 small gelatin pills pop out on the table, one clear, one black. Bringing the clear one over to her side, she then pushed the black one closer to Emma with a feminine 2-fingered poke. "We will do it at the same time. Simply place the pill in your mouth, then take a sip of water and swallow. It's that easy. Are you ready?" Emma stared down at the black pill, then raised it slowly to her lips. But before taking it, Emma just had to know. "You see, there are just some things I can't understand. What exactly did I see today? And who was that strange man? He looked like a fictional reptile." The woman interrupted again, this time a bit more brash about it. "Emma, do you care about your fellow citizens?" What a strange question, she thought. Immediately, Emma responded, "Of course I do, but I don't see what that—" The woman interrupted again, now more kindly this time. "Then take the pill, Emma. What will it do? Put your mind at ease, of course. Tomorrow, you will be free of all these unsettling questions, as if you never even had them." "And yours? Why is it clear?" The woman looked and batted her eyes for a second. "You know why, don't you? It's just a formality that I do it with you." Margaret grabbed her clear pill and lifted her cup. "Ready?" Emma looked at Margaret, then at G17, and noticed the wellness android was watching her a bit too intently, its visor's blue lines almost flat. "Okay, I'll take it, but can you answer me one last question?" "Swallow the pill, and I suppose I can do that," Margaret kindly said, a long smile raising her lips. The two swallowed their pills, Emma's the black, then the Mind Easer with the clear. "Very good, Emma. Most kind of you to do that. Now, what is your question?" Emma had so many, but felt hurried and could only ask one. What should it be? Her mind felt like a tangled mess needing to be fixed. Her head suddenly began to feel light and worried. She knew she had to ask fast, so she did. What was all that red liquid spilling everywhere at the park? Where did it come from? Margaret let out a laugh unsuited to her subtle and pleasant features. "That, Emma 23, Margaret began, as she pointed the same two graceful fingers used to push the pill to point to Emma's chest. That was what we call blood, and it runs inside every living thing, both you and I. It would be wise to remember not to lose too much of it. Unfortunately, that advice too will be put at ease soon. Emma's head crashed over into the long-seated couch she was just upright on. Now, her world turned to the side, her eyes struggling to stay open. She faintly saw Margaret stand as she walked over to her, whispering a jumble of words. But Emma's body lost all control. She could barely hear, let alone move. The last thing her eyes saw before shutting to darkness was Margaret's red-heeled shoes as she left for the door. Let us end the story here for now. As I believe you can imagine what happens the next morning, Emma 23 would go to work as she always did, forgetting all the terrible events that took place in the park as she walked right past it, remembering none of it as her utopian world and life continues on as if it never even happened. Now remember my question about the falling tree. Here is what the question's creator, Dr. George Berkeley, an Anglican bishop and philosopher in the 1600s, said, "If a tree falls in a forest and no one is around to hear it, does it make a sound?" According to George, the answer is yes, it did make a sound because God heard it. Another great mind, Albert Einstein, although not directly responding to this question, offers insights through his theories. For example, Einstein's theory of relativity touches on the nature of observation and reality. He suggested that reality is dependent on the observer's frame of reference. In this context, whether the tree makes a sound could be seen as relative to the observer's presence and sensory capabilities. I sincerely hope you, as the observer of this video, enjoyed it. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and comment for more content like this in the future.